and begin my introduction. So today's topic is creating a curriculum for mission-based business education. Our presenter is Eban Goodstein, Director of the Bard MBA in Sustainability. I'm going to read portions of the announcement for those who did not see the original announcement or those who will be listening to the recording. As corporate leadership has moved beyond single bottom line management, at least in its thinking, how has graduate business education evolved? Or put differently, how should we be training managers to help run for-profit or nonprofit purpose-driven firms? In response to rising student demand and employer interest, many business schools have added a course or two in sustainability strategy or corporate social responsibility. Some now offer 3 or 4 course sustainability concentrations. Others provide joint degree options. Still others have moved to include at least one social or environmental case in all courses. Finally, a small group of graduate business schools, including the MBA in Sustainability program at Bard College, have fully integrated sustainability into a core curriculum. Sustainability in Bard's program is baked in rather than bolted on. So what skills and competencies are required to manage in this new environment with a focus is on an integrated bottom line? For the last 5 years, Bard MBA faculty have been working on this question. This webinar will discuss the construction of the Bard MBA in Sustainability's curriculum and then present the Bard MBA Toolkit, a set of concepts that students are expected to master during their course of study. The Bard curriculum is a work in progress, and the intent here today is to promote discussion and debate about the direction of graduate business education when firms are managed for social and environmental mission. A bit more about Eban. He is, again, the director of the Center for Environmental Policy and the MBA in Sustainability at Bard. In recent years, Eban has coordinated an amazing series of national educational initiatives on climate change, which collectively has involved over 2,500 colleges, universities, high schools, and community organizations. He's widely published and the author of a college textbook, Economics and the Environment, and I'm delighted to welcome Eban to the Sustainability Curriculum Consortium's webinar series. And Eban, I'm turning it over to you now.
Ira, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for your work developing the SCC. This is a critical forum for dialogue that I hope faculty and students across the country are engaged in and going on the folks involved. So I'm getting some feedback here. I think it's going now. No, it's coming back. I think it stopped. Yes, it stopped. Good. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Looking forward to the conversation today. Want to first start with an advertisement. Twice a year at Bard, at our graduate programs, we run weekend leadership training workshops for undergraduates and recent graduates called the CTC Fellows Program. It's a fabulous weekend. Students from across the country and recent graduates attend. It costs $30. Once you're here, we put you up and feed you. Our next one is this weekend, actually, so we probably have a couple of spaces left if you have any students that you know of who might be interested in coming. But if not, we do it in December and March every year, so you can keep your eye out for that opportunity. And we have a theory of change that involves the 5 things on the left there: vision, courage, network, storytelling, and asking. And students spend most of the weekend, a lot of the weekend, really on the storytelling piece. So it's a great opportunity, and please reach out to me if you've got any questions about it. Okay, so I always start my slideshows with some version of this story because this is why we're all here. Let me just pause on the Puerto Rico thing. You know, we had 5 record-breaking hurricanes in October. All 5 of them broke records on different dimensions. But the Puerto Rico one, I think, is, for me, just really powerful for a number of reasons. And one is that here we are 6 months out from that hurricane, and there's still a third of the island without electricity. I mean, if you imagine any other, I mean, this is a community of American citizens, right? If the state of Iowa or Massachusetts was 1/3 of the people without power, we would probably be concerned and engaged. And yet somehow Puerto Rico has kind of faded into the background. And my fear is that this sort of phenomenon of extreme weather events is becoming the new normal. And we're not going to be providing the kind of all-out assistance that we provided to New Orleans for most of the communities that are going to be devastated as we continue to live in an unsustainable climate dynamic, if you will. I think Puerto Rico is, as well, is going to be the first big wave of environmental refugees that the United States has experienced since the Dust Bowl. Of course, New Orleans was that in some sense. I mean, the city lost 1/3 of its population. But there were a couple 100,000 people that left New Orleans eventually. There will be 1 million or more Puerto Ricans who leave the island because there's no longer any economic viability for them there. That's on the one hand. I mean, on the other hand, that was an economy that wasn't working well for most people anyway, and in particular, an energy system that wasn't working well for most people. The island was importing fuel oil to run a very rickety grid that wasn't reliable. And so, of course, the hope here is that we can step back from this and a collaboration between civil society, business, and government, that the Puerto Ricans can rewire their entire island with sustainable energy. It's an island. It should have solar energy. It should have wind power. It should have battery storage. And of course, it's a metaphor for the world, right? We're all an island, and we need to understand how we're going to make this transition rapidly. I also like to put this picture up because I think the most underreported fact of the last few years is that between 2014 and 2016, end of 16, so a 3-year period, the planet actually heated up 0.5 degree Fahrenheit in just those 3 years. And remarkably, I show this audiences all the time to climate-aware audiences, and maybe 10% of the audience is aware of how fast the planet heated up in the last little while. So the urgency of this conversation that we're all engaged in is real, and it's really what lies behind the construction of all of the graduate programs in sustainability at Bard College that we run. And the way I like to talk about this is that there's really 3 ways to get involved in the Change the Future work in a professional way. And they are policy, education, and business. So the students who come to Bard to do our MS Environmental Policy or Climate Science and Policy courses, they want careers changing the rules, right? They want to get rid of bad laws and regulations and put in place good laws and regulations to drive more sustainable outcomes. And mostly that's sort of seen as the province of government, right? So, at the international UN level, national level, not so much in Washington, D.C. these days, but soon I think we'll get back to that. And certainly a lot of action at the local and state and regional levels. And this is where we kind of get into the business story. In the last 15 or 20 years, we've seen the rise of a lot of internal business policy change with the intent of driving more sustainable outcomes. So greening operations, figuring out how to reduce environmental footprint. So actually a number of our policy students are actually moving into the private sector from the policy side, from the internal rule change and the sustainability policy side of the equation. Second way to change the world is to change minds. So that's our new MED in environmental education. But the third route, and the one relevant to our conversation today, is this idea of changing the game or transforming the game. And this is our MBA in sustainability, because at the end of the day, no matter what the rules say and no matter how many people get their minds changed, over the coming years, business has got to figure out how to radically reinvent itself so that we are keeping the lights on and getting food on the table and getting our health care in ways that are fundamentally more ecologically sustainable, that radically reduce environmental footprint, but also that treat workers and communities and suppliers and employers and stakeholders with justice and with respect, because you can't have an ecologically sustainable business that's not also socially sustainable. And so in our mind, this, there really isn't any distinction between, in the sustainability dialogue, between kind of the green side and the people side. Those things have really got to be integrated. And at the end of the day, we're living at this extraordinary moment in the history of the human species, where 10,000 years of human history are crushed in the next 3 decades. And our graduates, their job is to be the folks who are going to lead the way through, right? And figure out how we're going to meet the needs of what will soon be 10 billion people in a world where, of the people alive today, half of those folks are barely getting by and living on $5 or $6 a day. And everybody's aspiring to a better quality of life. And we're already struggling over water and oil and fish and forests and topsoil and biodiversity, and the oceans are getting more acidic, and it's getting hotter all the time. And our politics is a disaster at the national level. So those are what's unique about our students, and your students, I'm sure as well, is that these are the people who are awake to these issues. They want to engage, they want to figure out how they can be part of it. And that's the direction that we're trying to support. I'm getting a lot of feedback now. That'd be great. Okay. So with that kind of backdrop to sort of what we're about, broadly speaking, and the different directions that I think are all critical, not one of them is more important than the other, we can move on. So changing the rules, changing minds, and today we're talking about transforming the game, but ultimately it's about leading the change in a hurry because we don't have a lot of time. So the genesis of the MBA in sustainability, kind of intellectually, is really a switch in mindset from thinking about environmental degradation and exploitation of workers and communities as being a problem of externalities, negative externalities, to thinking about them as being one of design, okay? So traditionally throughout the 20th century, essentially a neoclassical economics paradigm ruled when we were thinking about these problems. So, and this was certainly the way I was educated and raised, and I'm an economist, to think about global warming or toxic pollution or child labor or abusive working conditions as essentially being externalities. So these are, in other words, competitive business firms engage in these practices and externalize those costs because they can and because they have to, right? Because they're in a competitive environment, and if they didn't externalize those costs, they'd be driven out of business. So that's kind of the paradigm that has explained these challenges in the 20th century, and the solution to those problems was government regulation, right? So government was supposed to step in and level the playing field by outlawing those practices and forcing firms to internalize externalities. And because everybody had to do it, nobody would gain a competitive advantage from polluting or exploiting workers and communities. And that paradigm was very powerful, and certainly in the United States from the 60s, 70s, and 80s and into the 90s, we saw this tremendous wave of bipartisan support for a series of regulatory reforms that got a lot done. Indeed, globally, there's still even progress being made using this paradigm. But clearly it has limits, as we're seeing now, in the national realm, where we're seeing a rollback of those regulations because they're viewed as costly, and there's advantage to be had by some firms when those regulations are rolled back or eliminated. And so beginning in the 60s, you had the emergence of a different way to think about pollution and exploitation of workers and communities. So much a problem of externalities, but it was really a problem of design. And that you could begin to make the argument that if we just put our minds to it, through radical reimagination, that we might actually be able to figure out how to build profitable businesses that eliminated pollution. just designed it out of the system, and that paid decent wages and provided good working conditions because it was profitable to do so. But this has a long intellectual genesis, but I think you can trace it pretty clearly through Buckminster Fuller in the 60s to Amory Lovin's book in the late 1970s, I think it was 78, Soft Energy Paths, where he really, for the first time, popularized this idea that we could make a move away from coal, nuclear, and gas at the time, and oil. This was a pre-climate change discussion, right? So this was before anybody was talking about global warming. But we could move towards renewable energy and super efficient vehicles and efficient houses, and make money and employ people, and that there was this very positive sum kind of opportunity out there. Hunter was working with Amory at the time, and then they went on to found the Rocky Mountain Institute in 1981 or 2, something like that. The first super efficient pre-lead kind of building structures. And then Paul Hawken wrote a book in, I believe it was 95 or 96, The Ecology of Commerce, that added sort of a new twist to this, which was that if we really want to get into this design question, then the model is clearly nature, right? That we have to build business systems that mimic ecological systems and he had 3 principles. One is that natural systems run on renewable energy. They run on the energy of the sun, so there's never an energy crisis. Natural systems are circular, so all waste is food, so there's no pollution. And natural systems were also, he said, thrive on diversity. So this was an idea that it was kind of in opposition to sort of the big box movement of that decade. That you needed to have kind of a locally rooted and sort of many different forms of business structure in order to thrive, have a thriving system. Paul and Amory and Hunter in 99 wrote Natural Capitalism, which sort of further codified these ideas and really provided lots of examples. And then kind of the final big book really was Cradle to Cradle. Bill McDonough, really sort of emphasizing the idea of kind of a circular economy. And then Ray Anderson kind of put all this stuff into practice. The story is he had to give a speech somewhere and somebody handed him a copy of Ecology of Commerce so he'd know something about environment. It moved him deeply. He began to implement practices in his carpet business. And then he realized he was making lots of money, that everything he was doing to be more sustainable was also lending competitive advantage. He hired Hunter and Amory and others and Paul to help him sort of build out this vision. And this really was what launched kind of this revolution in thinking. It really was an intellectual revolution, and one that it's a journey that I was on, and I went from being a policy regulation sort of responder, still am, but now I'm open to this second idea, that we can build businesses that are in business to solve social and environmental problems profitably. So that to me is kind of the intellectual history of it. And where it's gotten to today is pretty remarkable, So this idea of mission-driven business, so businesses that are putting social and environmental mission first, has actually become very mainstream in this roughly 20-year time span from, let's say, 95 to 2015 or 17 when Hawkins' book first came out. You've got small startups like a company, Ecovative, which is just north of here up in Troy, New York. This was a company that is in business to move styrofoam out of the global supply chain. Styrofoam, not a sustainable product, obviously. What they've done is, it's biologically inspired design, biomimicry. So in order to solve our shipping problem, this is a company that grows big blocks of mushrooms, so tightly intertwined fungus. They do it in dark rooms at room temperature, so it's a very low energy process. And then they kill it, and then they can chop it up and use it for shipping peanuts or put it in molds, as you see here, to ship wine bottles or computers. And it's a circular product, right? So when you're done with that, you really can throw it away. in the sense that it can become food for some other production process. Cliff Bar, a really interesting company, managing for 5 bottom lines. So brand, community, planet, people, and business. And they actually have VPs of each of those areas who collaborate on any kind of major business decisions to make sure that all of the perspectives are representative. And they're looking to find synergies, not trade-offs, between those different perspectives. And they've been very successful in doing that. So this is an integrated bottom line. It's not a triple bottom line. That was a useful concept maybe 15 years ago. But really, if it's triple, then what happens when the business starts to suffer is that the people and the planet, which were bolted on, get sacrificed. This is really a perspective about how do you actually make more money by focusing on mission first. And you've got big companies, not just startups and smaller companies like Cliff, but big companies like Unilever, whose CEO Paul Pullman has said, they have their sustainable living plan. They're going to double their sales globally. They already touch billions of people a day with their consumer goods products. They're going to double their sales, cut their environmental footprint in half, and source all of their products sustainably. That's their commitment. Or the Nikes and Levi's of the world, who look at their water pollution problem in developing countries from their textile manufacturing, one of the biggest sources of water pollution, and have made a commitment to actually to eliminate that pollution, not sort of control it by putting filters on their plants, but rather move to a waterless dyeing process that can eliminate that major pollution source, and make money doing it because they've figured out how to redesign the system in a way that it just takes that pollution right out. At the end of the day, and on the social side, you've got companies like Grayston Bakery in Yonkers who, they make Ben and Jerry's brownies, but their real mission is to employ hard-to-employ folks. So when you want to work at Grayston, you show up, you don't have a resume, you don't tell people you were incarcerated. They just put you to work. You work for 6 weeks. If you are a good worker, you work for another 6 weeks. If you're a good worker, they keep you on. So this is this kind of vision of a new kind of business, and it's remarkable how fast this vision has influenced business thinking. So just last month, Larry Fink, who runs BlackRock Asset Management, they manage over $1 trillion in assets. I think they're the biggest private asset management firm in the world. Sent out a letter to his CEO saying, if you can't really articulate your environmental or social mission, I don't think you're going to be around doing business in 5 or 10 years, and I don't want to invest in you. And so we've seen that this spread of kind of a mission-driven focus is really powerful, and it really has begun to replace, at least rhetorically, the mantra of late 20th century business, which was that business was in business to maximize profits for shareholders, and that was the Milton Friedman view, famously articulated, I think, back in '72 in a New York Times editorial. So again, at least rhetorically, this idea of purpose-driven firms has gone very mainstream. The Harvard Business Review in 2016, these are some quotes from the top 3 CEOs in the world, according to Harvard Business Review. They actually used environmental social governance factors to rank them. And it's all about purpose and doing good and a sustainable vision. And maybe this is vision washing or purpose washing, but as Hunter Levins has said, and Hunter teaches in our MBA program, that hypocrisy is the first step towards real change. So, this is where it's at. I'm going to end with just one more anecdote about this, because I'm actually on the board of a company, a $3 billion private company based in the Midwest, and have recently seen this transformation in this company. So, one of the company presidents came in to our last board meeting and said, we're no longer a seller of commodity X. That's not what we do. We're in the business of supporting community outcomes that are desirable to our main customers. So that kind of vision switch is really unlocking a lot of interesting thinking and productivity within the company. So basically, if you're not mission driven these days, then millennials don't want to work for you. You can't align your people. Your consumers don't care, or consumers are worried about you. You're exposing yourself to risk, and you're missing opportunity. That's the story that really lies behind the MBA in sustainability at Bard. Okay, now in spite of this sort of transformation in corporate thinking, at least at the top, conventional business schools have not responded very well to this challenge, because they're inhabited by tenured business professors who don't believe in this stuff. I mean, they were trained in a Milton Friedman world. They believe in a Milton Friedman world. They think that if you are going to solve environmental social problems, you're going to be sacrificing profits and satisfying managerial do-gooder instincts at the expense of shareholder value. That's the vision that they grew up with. It's what they believe. Now, every MBA worth its, any kind of aspiration to credibility has done something. I mean, they've added a center, or they have a person or a class, or maybe even, 3 classes and a concentration. But 90% of what they're teaching is still single bottom line, make as much money as you can without breaking too many laws kind of business. So it's been really left up to outsiders to pioneer an alternative kind of business education. And this began in the late 90s and early 2000s with 2 schools on the West Coast, Bainbridge Graduate Institute and Presidio School of Management. I mean, other people did this as well, and there were smaller players, but these are really the 2 that had an impact, as well as some efforts by Stu Hart at the bigger schools. So Liba and Gifford Pinchot started the Bainbridge Graduate Institute, and Hunter Lovins and Ron Nazer and some other folks started the Presidio School of Management in San Francisco back in 2002, roughly. And Stu, coming out of a PhD at the University of Michigan, was instrumental in creating what he now calls saddlebag programs. So these kind of bolt-on, 2 or 3 course kind of concentration programs at University of North Carolina, Charlotte, University of Michigan, Cornell, and he's now in Vermont, where they've created another one of these kind of, really full-on sustainability MBAs, along with Presidio. BGI went under, unfortunately, a couple of years ago, and Presidio bought them out. So there's kind of the one school now on the West Coast. So these are the folks who really pioneered this approach, and on whom we built our MBA vision and curriculum. So let me tell you about how that happened. I was on the West Coast, actually, teaching at Lewis and Clark College out in Portland. So I was aware of what was going on at Presidio and BGI, and I knew some people that were going to those programs, and I knew some people that were teaching in the program. And I had been a college teacher for about 20 years until about 1999. I stayed a college teacher, but I sort of had a second life, and I started to run some nonprofit organization that was focused on climate change education and action. Actually got into the business world a bit. One of the things we did in this nonprofit I set up was from 2000 to 2004, we ran a thing called the Greenhouse Network. And we had the race to stop global warming. So this is my first entrepreneurial venture. And this was supposed to be like a race for the cure. And there were going to be hundreds of thousands of people running through the streets with t-shirts on that said race to stop global warming. And it was pretty successful. And I had a guy who was terrific running it. So we started in Portland in 2000. And in 2004, we were running in Central Park in New York, and Presidio in San Francisco, the Loop in Chicago, and Denver, and Boston, and Minneapolis, and Seattle. And we would get, 600 or 700 runners showing up, and we really needed 800 to break even. And so we had to shut it down in 2004 because we were actually starting to lose real money at that point. But I got engaged at that time with Cliff Bar, Aveda, Toyota, who was just coming out with their Prius. And I was beginning to be really intrigued by this idea that I'd read about from Paul Hawken about this sort of ecology of commerce and sustainable business, and was beginning to see models and getting really engaged with that idea. I transitioned our work out. Basically, we're doing a lot of trainings, and then Al Gore kind of took that over in 2006. So we transitioned to a big national teach-in called Focus the Nation, which in 2008, that was what involved a couple thousand college, universities, and high schools in a one-day teach-in on global warming solutions. We did that twice. And then I got an offer from Bard to move east to run their graduate programs in sustainability, which at that time was just the ME, the Master's in Environmental Policy program. I took advantage of that opportunity because I wanted to pull into sort of one roof. I was tired of teaching Economics 100 and kind of disgusted that I had to teach microeconomic theory, which I would never do again the way I was doing it back then. And I came to Bard. Bard, it turns out, has been a very fabulous place to support this kind of entrepreneurial educational activity. So that's President Eban Goodstein in the center there. And Bard is a really unusual college, and that has a lot to do with Leon's legacy. So Bard was a kind of a small progressive college in the 60s, not a very big alumni base, not a wealthy alumni base. Leon took the college over. He was the youngest college president ever. He was a college president age 22, believe it or not at Bard. Came to Bard at 27. He's now 72, so he's been here for 45 years or something like that. And he's raised huge amounts of money and then spent it all sort of elevating Bard into the ranks of the top 30 U.S. News and World Report schools. And he's done that in part by providing a platform for folks who have entrepreneurial ideas to do things well beyond the realm of just kind of a conventional liberal arts program. So we run the biggest college prison program in the country. We have about 500 inmates in New York who are earning Bard degrees while they're incarcerated. We run early college high schools in Manhattan and Queens and Newark and Baltimore and Cleveland, where students are taught by PhD faculty as in high school, and they earn an associate's degree. Public high schools, they're paid for by the public. And we also run liberal arts colleges in challenging places like the West Bank in Palestine and in St. Petersburg in Russia, and we're opening one in Burma, in Central Asia. And kind of, so the point here is that Bard is unusually supportive of people starting entrepreneurial programs. And basically I have kind of two conversations to get this thing through, and they just said, don't lose money and go. And the reason I did it really was, I mean, as I said, I'd been aware of what was happening on the West Coast. And when I moved east, I was looking around to see if there was a good sustainability from the ground up MBA, and didn't really see one. And then I was at the COP meetings in 2009 in Copenhagen, where kind of the whole thing fell apart. And that was the last hope for some sort of top-down agreement. And Hunter and I were sitting there actually having dinner, and she said, doesn't really matter if we'd agreed to 80% reductions or not. It doesn't matter what the rules say. At the end of the day, business is going to have to figure out how to get this done. And so let's start the business school in Manhattan. And there is a danger to having lunch with Hunter Lovins, which is that you have all these great ideas that you have to follow up on. And we did. So Hunter and I put our minds together and we started this new MBA. So that's a little background. I'm going to move now into sort of the details of what we did. We looked to Presidio and BGI as kind of our curricular models, and we used the hybrid structure that they developed. So this is well, they didn't develop it, but I mean, they used it. It's sort of getting very popular now in the master's world. So our classes meet Friday morning to Monday afternoon once a month, and then online Tuesdays and Thursday nights. It's not an MBA Light. It's a full-on 60-credit MBA. It's the same you'd get in a conventional program. It's just much better organized. And I actually like it. I think that for a skills-based curriculum, a good hybrid approach is actually, I think, better than a conventional go somewhere and take a bunch of classes for 2 years. And the reason I think that is that I think of our program as 24-day retreats tied together by online and spread out over 2 years. And that retreat environment is actually a very powerful way to learn. And I'm sure we all know that from retreats we've been on. Because our students are they're like totally focused for the 4 days they're there. Classes are long. So it forces a very interactive kind of pedagogy. You can't just lecture. Lots of guest speakers, lots of team projects, and you can make great connections across classes. You can have outside conversations, and I think it just really solidifies the education. And then, of course, we've got this kind of webinar structure, more people faces than you're getting with this one, but very live in that sense. So it's not a asynchronous, it's a synchronous kind of education that really substitutes well for a lecture discussion. And then of course, just it's, from a student perspective, they can work comfortably 30 hours a week, so they don't sacrifice either the experience or the income. And being in New York, it's allowed us to assemble a world-class faculty of practitioners in a short period of time. So Bard was awarded the #1 Classroom Experience Award by Princeton Review a couple of years ago, and of course they make that up, they don't know, but we'll take it. And certainly that level of teaching excellence is what's expected in a Bard program, and we've been able to deliver on that in large part because of our location, but also because of the structure. So it's a practitioner-based faculty. These are folks who are inventing this stuff, and they're bringing it into the classroom, and they're bringing their colleagues into the classroom. So it's a very dynamic kind of education. And it's really that faculty that have put the flesh on the bones of the curriculum that we sort of structure that we borrowed from BGI and Presidio. It's been their job to marry the best of what you would get in a conventional MBA program with the sustainability focus and dimension, and prune away the worst of what you get in conventional MBA programs. So really 3 verticals in the program: sustainability vision. So how do you see opportunity where other people see social and environmental costs? Leadership is fundamental. And of course, they teach leadership in conventional MBA programs, but it's much more important in our program because once you've seen that vision, it's an unconventional vision, and so you have to engage others in thinking that way. So we have a track that has a personal leadership course, a leading teams and organizations class, and then a conventional HR class, really just about core management skills. And then the final sort of dimension of the curriculum is just execution. So once you've seen that vision and you understand how to lead other people into it, how do you just build a good business around it? How do you execute it against it from a marketing perspective, strategy, operations, finance, business economics, managerial economics, all that stuff that you would get in a conventional core program. So this is our curriculum organized by term in a 2-year version of the program. There's also a part-time 3-year version of the program. And so you're going to see courses that have very conventional sounding titles like finance, marketing, entrepreneurship, operations and supply chains. So we teach those courses and those skills, but every class is wrapped around this idea of how do I use those skills to build a mission-driven business? How do I use them to build a business that's in business to solve social and environmental problems? We made a decision to not go down the road that BGI went down, which was to really try and integrate the curriculum through that kind of, because they had the weekend structure. I think at the end of the day, they were just down to like one big class or something like that, each module. But we just felt like we were content to kind of keep sort of the siloed disciplinary business lenses, but tie them together through a focus on sustainability and also through a lot of kind of cross faculty conversation about the content of the classes. The other thing I would say is that it's a core curriculum. We have only one elective slot it's actually we've moved around a little bit. It's actually in the 3rd term now, where we have opportunities to concentrate in impact finance or curricular supply chain management, or opportunity to do some work in sustainable development. And our reasoning is that if you're going to be working in sustainability in the business world, you have to be able to you have to understand the sources of sustainable advantage. And they're going to come from telling your story better, from the marketing side, they're going to come from the employee engagement side on HR. they're going to come from the strategy side, they're going to come from the ops side. So there are so many ways in which sustainability enhances value that our students really have to have a broad managerial education and not a stripped down core, which is increasingly what you're seeing in business schools. So in some ways, we're going against the grain of what conventional business programs are doing, which have stripped down cores and the opportunity to do super deep dives. We think that's kind of really following the lead of PhD faculty and into kind of obscure game theory stuff than it is really providing a good management education. This is the organization by vertical. And of course, there's cross-cutting here, so this is a little bit arbitrary, but that's the way we think about it. Strategy actually probably belongs more in the sustainability vision column. So, but anyway, this is what we do. We require every student to take entrepreneurship, actually, even if they're not going to start their own businesses, because we feel that's a strong leadership class as well. Okay, to really get visibility to our curriculum, we did something that has been very helpful. And that is that we asked all of our faculty, we required all of our faculty to come up with the 10 key concepts that they wanted to communicate in their class. This was in addition to learning goals and everything else in the syllabus. And what we said by that was, okay, what's a concept? Concept is something, an idea, that 5 years from now, you would hope your students would be able to talk about intelligently for 5 minutes. Okay? So peer 360 assessments in the personal leadership. Principled negotiation, what does that trigger for you? How can you talk about that? Dashboards for leadership development. Okay, what might be on those dashboards? So this was the 10 things that our PLD teacher came up with. And we have 10 things in operations and 10 things in managerial economics and whatnot. So we actually have a map of about 160 key concepts that define our curriculum. And it allowed us to see also where we were overlapping and also potentially to talk about gaps that we were missing. And we feel like this has been a really valuable toolkit for us to think internally about our program, but also externally to show the world what we're doing and ask for feedback as to the value of our education and places that we're missing. And we've done a lot of this kind of working with employers and folks in industry to kind of get a sense of the direction of our program. And we actually benchmarked this against the ISSP, International Society for Sustainability Professionals, competency list, and also against a competency list that we sort of drew from the Harvard business curriculum writing series. And it stacked up very well against ISSP. I mean, it's like a 99% match and about a 65% match with kind of what Harvard viewed as the top 100 or so core ideas in a business education. And that seems comfortable for us. I mean, we don't want to replicate what Harvard does, but we do want to check and see if there's things missing there that we felt like we needed to be picking up on. The other thing I would say about our program is that it's highly, highly, highly experiential, because we feel like you can't do sustainability in the abstract. And so we made a purposeful decision to offer a year-long consulting course in the first year. So we throw our students in the deep end of the experiential pool before they even had any business classes. And most of our students are not undergraduate business majors. And we put them on a team of 5 students consulting for Etsy, Eileen Fisher, Siemens Wind, JetBlue, Unilever, Con Ed. And it's a carefully mentored class. It's taught by Laura Gitman, who's the head of the New York office of BSR. And the students have done fabulous work. And it's really been a fantastic launchpad for helping them understand what business sustainability challenges are all about. The second thing that we do is we devote 9 credits in the second year to a mentored capstone. Hunter's one of our mentors. We also have another couple of faculty members who do this. One-on-one, the students basically are asked to develop a vision of what their life passion is, and then build a business case around that. In other words, how am I going to get people to pay me to do this? Pursue one of three routes: either entrepreneurial, where they're going to develop their own business vision. The second route is more consulting. A few years ago, our students set up a little consulting firm with a website and business cards. And so if students want to pursue a consulting route, after that first year, they can do more of it. They can get clients on their own. We've got a team this year doing really cool work around circular supply chain for folks in the fashion industry. And then the third route is one where you kind of identify the sector you want to be in, and you evaluate your skills, and you see if there's missing pieces, and you try and get an internship to support your business growth, and that might be in a company you're already working in. Two quick examples. Last year we had a woman who really decided she wanted to be chief sustainability officer for a cannabis company, a big cannabis company. That's her dream. There are no big cannabis companies yet. She spent the year researching the cannabis industry, going to conferences, meeting people, figuring out where her skills gaps were, and very proud to say that a couple months ago she took a job in Colorado as head of topicals at an emerging, cannabis company. And the reason was, I said, she doesn't smoke weed, that's not what she's into, but she just sees that this is going to be a huge industry where sustainability is going to be key and critical to establishing brand credibility, and she wants to be part of it. Another woman this year, got a job interning at a low-income solar business down in DC, a big company that does low-income solar, and now they're offering her a job as kind of finance position. So that's kind of the strategy of that part of the capstone. And finally, I'll just wind up. We're very career focused. That's got to be critical to any kind of a terminal master's degree. And if our students aren't working, they're not changing the world. So that's a problem for us. We do that through our practitioner faculty who've got a lot of networks, and they introduce the students to lots of folks. We have a mentor program where we'll match any student who wants one with a mentor every year they're in the program, 3 cups of coffee. Do lots and lots of networking opportunities. New York City is fabulous for that. There's something happening every day. We encourage students to engage in case competitions. Pleased to say one of our teams just got advanced to the finals in the Patagonia Haas Business School case competition. We have a career class that's taught by one of our faculty. And then I mentioned the career-focused capstone as being very important. So let me just wind up on kind of what does it mean to work in sustainable business? What are the directions that students go? And so that's Libby Zamitis in the upper left. She's an entrepreneur. She actually was a dual degree student. She did our MS MBA. So by day, she's a climate scientist, and she works for New York's DEC on sea level rise. But by night, she runs a company. She's the CEO of Up Homes, which is has a vision of disrupting the mobile home industry. What they've done is they've developed a prototype of a 250 square foot modular manufactured home. So you can start small with a tiny home and move up. They're working to raise $1.5 million right now to build their first 20 homes. So very excited about that business. The second route, and probably the most common for folks interested in sustainable business, is to just pursue a traditional business role, but in a mission-driven company, or in a company that you can help move along the road towards sustainability. So that's David in the upper middle there. He got his MBA from us a couple of years ago, and he sells cars. That's what he does with his MBA. He's a very good car salesman, best in the Northeast for Tesla. Clearly wants to move up into management, but for now he's doing the blocking and tackling, and he's bringing a sustainability background to that story. Brooke, a little bit of both. She worked for CBRE, big energy, a residential development company or commercial development, helping them where she can to really have a greater focus on energy efficiency in their construction and design. So the third avenue is to just pursue a sustainability role in a company. So that's Hannah in the lower left. She's Chief Sustainability Officer at Pratt Whitney, the big engine manufacturer. And then the fourth and final avenue is Megan in the lower bottom there, is sustainability consulting. And because we're in New York and because we teach that class and our students have lots of opportunities, we've placed lots of students in consulting, BSR, KPMG, Futura, Carbon Disclosure Project, True Cost S&P. I think I'm going to wind it up now. I've got one more slide about Miles's rooftop aquaponics business in Brooklyn, but I think we're running a little bit out of time, so I could talk about that. Really, the mixture here of sustainability work is this intersection of what you love and what you do well, helping the students identify their personal passions, and matching those with, what the world needs, which of course is the sustainability piece, and then what the world will pay for, which is, the personal sustainability piece. And that intersection there is bliss. So I'm in the bliss business, and I like to sort of offer my services to students, whether they're my students or not, to have a conversation with them about how they can make their way in the world. So we actually have an informational webinar about our programs tomorrow night at 7 p.m. We have an open house here in Annandale this weekend. And again, our CTC Fellows Program is March 9th through 11th. So Ira, with that, let me stop, and let's see if we got questions.
Thank you, Eban, for that great presentation. Now I'm the one giving feedback. So let's turn to the questions that have come in. A number of attendees have raised the question of the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and whether you've managed to work the SDGs into your curriculum, and even if not having done that yet, what advice would you have for others in trying to incorporate the role of the SDGs for the private sector? That's a combination of 3 or 4 different comments.
Our students are the SDGs. I mean, that's their interests drive the program, and they come in. Everybody comes into our program interested in one of the Sustainable Development Goals. We obviously formally talk about them. 111 teaches a course called the Principles of Sustainable Management, so the students are exposed to the SDGs. I think in our employees and organizations class, we're doing. The students are participating in that Aim to Flourish project, which is highlighting people who are working towards the SDGs. And I think that's a great way to get any class involved, because students can learn about some entrepreneurs and help promote and highlight their work through the Aim to Flourish project. So that's one avenue that anybody who's teaching a course in which students can do a project that involves learning about some cool business or policy enterprise, just look up Aim to Flourish. In terms of how you can get it more broadly across the curriculum, again, I mean, I think that it's just the whole concept of mission-driven business and this new paradigm that I talked about at the beginning. I think it's intellectually very exciting, right? To think about not solving environmental and social problems not only through government action and regulation and policy, but also through design. And you can approach design from any discipline, whether it's art or political science or business or economics, and think about that, right? Is there a way that we could radically reimagine how we're doing things to both improve social and environmental outcomes and also be financially successful?
Okay, very good.
I guess, I mean, the SDGs are designed for anybody to have entry because there's 17 of them.
Yep.
Right? So it's kind of like there's no way you can't not get one of them into your class if you want to.
Absolutely. You mentioned something in your answer that I wasn't going to ask you about just yet, but since you raised it, the phrase you uttered was government action and policy. Mm-hmm. And in looking across the specific components of your curriculum at Bard, it wasn't obvious where you managed to squeeze in considerations of law, regulation, and even soft law like standards, which is so important in the sustainability context. Where does that manage to find its way into the curriculum?
Well, the standards come in our course in accounting and the integrated bottom line. So
Okay.
the students deal very explicitly with GRI and IRC and SASB and that kind of stuff. And we actually, for a program that has a sustainability focus, we actually deal very little explicitly with law and the regulatory environment. We have a final year course called Sustaining Mission, which really deals with institutional issues like employee ownership and unions and the structure of the company, and B Corps versus other versus co-ops and stuff like that. But yeah, we just don't deal much with environmental or business law or regulatory policy. I mean, the students are aware of it, and they certainly know that that they're going to, at some point, they're going to run into regulatory challenges and obstacles that are going to get in their way, and they're going to have to deal with them. And they teach courses in, negotiation and, critical conversation, so they could figure out how to talk to regulators if they needed to. But it's not something we do a lot of, interestingly enough.
Okay, something you and I can talk more about. The next comment and question, part of this we struggle with is how we balance, synergize business fundamentals. For example, reading financial statements or understanding inventory management, balancing that with sustainability skills and knowledge. How have you struck this balance?
Yeah. Let me just mention, of course, that we have a whole policy program that does deal with rules and regulations and laws, right? So the students who are interested in that space do joint degrees, and we typically get several of those a year. So we do have some students that are doing the intersection, but they're really not getting it out of the business program. They're getting it explicitly from the policy program. I think part of the way we do that is by having a core curriculum. So we have 60 credits that we get to play with, and that's a lot. So we can do a really good job of teaching the students business fundamentals at the same time that we are engaging them with leadership and vision. The other thing I would say would be that the experiential dimension, New York City Lab, really drives home the need for business fundamentals in a radical way, right? Because these students have got to present board level information, and it requires them to know their stuff. We do a lot of presenting. We have at the end of the first year, we have a thing called the Disrupt to Sustain case competition, where students in 3 of our classes, accounting, principles of sustainable management, and entrepreneurship, all have to get up on their hind legs and pitch their ideas. So there's a lot of accountability in the program around learning business fundamentals and expectation. And I'm pleased to say we actually won the Columbia Energy Case Competition last year. We placed highly in a number of other case competitions. So our business students, our students are stacking up very well in those forums against students from Ivy League MBA programs.
Okay, I'm going to try to meld together here 2 separate comments. One, in brief, is how have you measured educational outcomes and how have you measured impact? And the questioner is asking with something like my box is moving with more questions coming in. The questioner alludes to the Kirkpatrick or Phillips model. And before answering, let me say, looking at the other relevant question, you mentioned a general transformation in industry of being emission-driven towards sustainability. You give some examples, doubling their profits while having eco footprints. You mentioned that universities are not up to speed with the development. Concerning measures, do you have energy inputs and outputs, externalities, or has everything been internalized, waste, etc.? Ultimately, this attendee is asking, how are you defining sustainability? Is it having one's footprint, or is it moving along the road that's important?
You know, the definition of sustainability that we use is one that Hunter's been sort of honed, which is shared well-being on a healthy planet. That's kind of our definition of sustainability. At the business level, we think of it more as companies that are on a journey and are trying to pursue a social and environmental mission of reducing footprint and improving the well-being of the communities that they operate in and of their employees. And in terms of our own metrics, is that the question? Whether is it our internal metrics or the metrics that students are using to apply to the outside world? Or both?
I think metrics internally and how you're measuring your impact.
Yeah. So one of the things that we use the toolkit for is to assess learning outcomes around the key concepts. So we started to ask the question, you know, do you think you could talk intelligently for 5 minutes about this concept? And the students say not at all, or a little bit, or, you know, so we're starting to get a little feedback around that. And that's been interesting. And it's eye-opening because some of the faculty are a little surprised that they haven't kind of delivered as well as they thought they had on those ideas. So I think that's a little bit of a novel. I mean, there's always, you know, course evaluations, but they tend to be not as specific as ours are really in terms of the content of the curriculum. That's kind of a new assessment tool that we're pioneering. We have individual capstone presentations, which kind of allow us to assess student, you know, progress or you know, final product in some way, and that's useful. You know, we have 5 graduating classes at this point, so we really don't have data. We just have anecdotes around employment, and I could tell you some fabulous anecdotes, but that's probably not what you're looking for.
Well,
you know,
go ahead.
Our mission, we have a twofold mission. One is to educate hundreds of young people in this, and some not so young people, in the skills to change the world, but also it's through our success to influence business education and business globally. And that's part of why I'm having this webinar with y'all. But also we're in the process of really trying to think through how we can bring back some of the other work I used to do around the teach-ins and really begin to develop global learning communities, faculty and student learning communities around issues of impact finance and circular supply chain. So we have ambitions in that space as well, which we then would hope to build some metrics around. In terms of kind of the other question of how do we teach students to think about metrics, it really is a lot of it's about materiality. You know, how do you measure the things that are material to your business success? Because there's, you know, there's a global, unlimited possibility of ways you could impact the world. So how do you focus in on the metrics that are most critical to what the mission of your business is about?
As we begin to wrap up, Eban, before you return your slides to your contact information for everyone, can you scroll back up to the Brooklyn hydroponics example?
Sure.
I don't know whether you have on that slide or not the contact for that, but one of our colleagues based in Brooklyn would like to know if you can say a couple of quick words about that.
Yeah, so Miles Credian is the MBA alum who was part of this business. And I put the slide in here because it really is about this radical reimagination, right? You know, if we're going to meet the needs for protein of 10 billion people, we can't keep building confined animal feeding operations where a single farm produces more waste than the city of Los Angeles, right? And we try and throw that waste away, right, by putting it in hog ponds until the next supercharged hurricane comes through and distributes that waste into all the streams and rivers of North Carolina, kills those streams and rivers, kills the Chesapeake Bay, right? So this kind of aquaponics business where, you know, it's a closed loop system, all the waste from the fish are growing greens, selling the greens, selling the fish. And the idea is it's also providing employment in a urban environment. That's kind of the radical reimagination that we love to see. Very hard business to run, just from the ecological design perspective. They actually shut it down, even though it was written up in Forbes a few years ago. But Miles, I'm sure, would love to talk to you about it. And if you just send me an email, I'll be glad to put you in touch with it. That doesn't bother me so much that the company shut down, because 90% of entrepreneurial businesses shut down, especially when it's your first business. Miles will start other businesses. I am positive that's who he is. That's who's in his DNA, and he's doing the learning that he needs to. But what I love about it was the commitment to something not just marginal, but something radical.
Great. Thank you for elaborating on the hydroponics project there. Also, I wanted to let you know, Eben, that one attendee on today's webinar was particularly happy about your comments about Aim to Flourish. And that would be the coordinator of the Aim to Flourish program, Claire Summer. Claire and I are in contact about the potential for her to do an SCC webinar, so more on Aim to Flourish. But if you cannot wait for that, Claire tells me that people can reach her at Claire, which is CLAIRE, at Aim to Flourish, the numeral 2, aim2flourish.com. Another thing that I'm aware of as we wrap up and before we lose our quorum, happy birthday to you, Eben. That's the information my scouts have provided. Is that true?
Indeed it is. I am another year older today. I saw it coming, though. I knew it was coming.
Okay, well, you can run, but you can't hide from our scouts. And finally, again, if you want to repeat, you scroll back down to it. Very good. You've got your own informational webinar tomorrow, and the open house coming up. And when's the next time people can drop in and see Hunter Lovins in action?
Yeah, so people are always welcome to visit the MBA program. We're in Manhattan once a month, or up here at Bard in April. But typically in Manhattan, we're down in the financial district. Visiting days are Sundays. So, or if you want to come talk to Hunter, just send her an email, and she'd love to have breakfast with you when she's in town. So she flies in from wherever she happens to be on the planet to teach with us once a month. But if you would like to learn more about our MBA program, absolutely, please just come visit classes, meet with students, talk to faculty about what we're doing.
Very good. And to finally wrap up for all of us, thanks to all those who attended. Thanks, Eben, for sharing your insights and your great work at Bard. If you would like to learn more about our upcoming webinars, online cohorts, our faculty conference in June, please take a look at our website, www.curriculumforsustainability.org. And with that, I will conclude the recording for today. Thanks again, Eben.
Thank you, Ira, and thanks to the audience. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.